Hi, I'm Laney. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use the Stationer Swatchbook, a Creative Cloud library for wedding invitation designers. If you haven't purchased it yet, feel free to at the link in the description of this video. And if you have, I hope you've already watched the video about how to install the Stationer Swatchbook and that it's ready to be used and installed on your computer. If it is not yet, go ahead and watch that video first before we dive in. Now, a basic description of this library is that it is swatches for almost all of the vendors that we as an industry use in our designs. And there's a few ways you can use it, which I'll show you, and there's a couple notices that you should have about this that I'm going to cover kind of at the end, but the biggest notice that I need to cover up front is that this is not meant to be an exact match. It's also not meant to be a printable match. So if you were to, make a square and make it this rose nude from Announcement Converter's color, it is not guaranteed to print to be an exact match to the rose nude paper from Announcement Converters. This is because with digital printing, I don't know what settings, what program, or what printer you're using, and if you printed this swatch on 10 different printers or from 10 different programs, it would look different on every single one. That's just how it works with digital printing, so I cannot guarantee that these swatches will be a printable match to these colors. I do have a tool called the Printable Palette that can help you with a little bit of that. In the same way, I'm not updating this swatch book every single day, so you might find that some of these colors are out of stock or have been discontinued or are no longer offered in certain areas. That is just because that is what happens. It's the nature of this business. So whenever you're using something, make sure to check it's still being made, etc. And lastly, I don't have physical swatches of every single piece of this entire color palette. You'll notice there's several hundred swatches in here with ribbons and from a ton of different vendors and a ton of different variety. So I've tried to be as close as possible with the colors, but if they're not an exact match, that's okay. This is just to get you kind of in the general field and a workable mock-up or design for your client's sake. If you find something that's egregious, feel free to email me and I can always update it. I am planning to do updates once or twice a year because I know that colors change and offerings change. So if there is anything egregious, feel free to let me know. And if there are any vendors that you think would be helpful, also feel free to let me know. I could potentially include them in a future update. Now, there are a couple other just small things, housekeeping-wise, that I'll go over at the end, but I want to show you how to use this palette. If you can't use it as a perfect digital printing match, what can you use it for? So when you're designing, for instance, if you are designing and you need a certain color of envelope, you can just easily access that here. So I can just draw a rectangle for my envelope color, and then I can say, oh, I'm going to use Cards and Pockets because that's who I always use for my envelopes. These are in alphabetical order, starting with papers, then handmade papers, then wax seals, and then ribbons. So I'll go into my Cards and Pockets swatch. When you import it, everything will be expanded. I do recommend just kind of collapsing everything because it'll be easier to access. And you can say, oh, I really want to use Forest Green, scroll down, click Forest Green, and now you have this swatch not only on your envelope but in your document. So then if you're trying to do some text that you want to be also Forest Green, you can go and click it. Just as a reminder, this is not guaranteed to be an exact match to the envelope when you print it, but it's to get you to a starting point on your mock-up, and then you can use the printable palette or something to adjust your CMYK colors to be exactly right. But as far as showing the color of an envelope, showing the color of a ribbon, you can just find the swatch and you can use it. There's a few things like in Cards and Pockets, I have marked anything that is metallic with a star. I didn't do that in like Star Dream or Curious Metallics where everything under that palette is metallic. And then I've marked a couple that are proprietary to Cards and Pockets just because that's showing you information about where you may or may not be able to get those. For instance, if you're looking for coral, you won't be able to find it in other places. If you're looking for forest, however, since it's not proprietary, you might be able to find that in another place. Spoiler alert, you can. Another option here is you can just search. So I can search the word forest, and we found Forest Color Plan and Forest Cards and Pockets. We've also found, New Forest, Forest Green, Nostalgic Impressions, Black Forest Gamund, etc. So there's a lot of different options you can use here. Some of the paper lines have different options within them. So for instance, Mohawk has our Superfine, our IKEA color, our Strathmore, etc., all underneath the Mohawk umbrella. And Nina has a few things under there as well. I've done this also with the ribbons. If they have like silk and velvet, I've put those under drop downs as well. For Princewell, we've just included the different envelope colors in here as their papers either can fall under the Nina Super Fine or Rig Savoy or something else, or generally kind of in the stage of white. I didn't include a lot of palettes that were primarily white just because it's really difficult to get like the difference between white and soft white and natural white, etc., on screen and to feel exact with those. Now, another way that you can use the palette is to kind of search through vendors to find options. So instead of having to get out your swatches of pressed paper, or maybe you don't even have swatches from pressed paper, but you want to use them, they're a handmade paper vendor, just in case you're not familiar. You can just go to the pressed paper option and look through every option that they have, and you can say, oh, I really like this sage option. That's what I'm going to use. You could do the same thing with wax seals from Artist There or any of your other vendors. You can do the same thing with ribbons. So I find this really helpful. And you also have all the paper color swatches right next to it. So you can kind of say, oh, okay, what am I finding in pressed paper that matches with some envelopes I can get from Cards and Pockets? Or what ribbon is going to go well with this suite, etc. And all the colors are just right there. One final huge way that I see people using this palette is to explore vendors that they haven't used and kind of expand their color offerings. So for instance, Stella & Wolf is a ribbon vendor that's based in Canada. I had never heard of them before I started doing research for this palette, and someone suggested that we include them. They have a lot of beautiful silk twine, and silk velvet ribbon colors that I love, so I could go in here and say, oh wow, you know, this mauve is a really beautiful ribbon color. I'm going to use it on my next project. So I think this will help us kind of expand into new vendors that we haven't checked out before and explore things that we haven't used before, which is really fun. Okay, just a couple other little housekeeping things about the palette. I mentioned that the star means something is metallic. I didn't do this for like Star Dream and Curious Metallics where everything in that palette is metallic, but in general, if you see a star, that's what that means. For envelopments, I have included the number, which is the cost level of that paper. That's a big thing if you use envelopments, so you can just look here and you can see you're not going to accidentally use something that's a cost level 7 if that's not going to fit in your budget. I tried to make this as in-depth and as helpful as possible. Another thing with envelopments is that some of the papers, it was listed which Gammon color they were, so I included that in parentheses if I could under that swatch. One thing that I found, however, is if I make the name for the swatch too long, it just completely stops working. So I had to abbreviate in some ways. It should be pretty easy to understand what these things mean. Like the ENV is for envelopments. You'll also find, for instance, we did pressed paper is just pressed paper because all of those were short enough that we could spell them out. But then for porridge papers, some of them had longer names. So we did have to abbreviate that to PP. Of course, PP could be porridge or pressed paper. So the way that you understand what that is just that the name of the category is explaining it. Nostalgic Impressions is NI, Cards and Pockets is CP, Announcement Converters Nudes, those are AC, etc. I did only include the nude colors because those are the only ones proprietary to Announcement Converters. A lot of the other brands that you would search for with Announcement Converters, Artura, Basis, Classic Crest, Color Plan, etc., can be found under those places. So you might find certain swatches under multiple different platforms like Soho, Cards and Pockets, Color Plan. A lot of those colors overlap. For metallic colors, I wasn't able to use gradients at this time. That's something I will explore in a future update, but in general, those are just going to be solid swatches at this point. And another future update I have in mind is to include the PMS colors for every piece within a swatch. To do that, I'm going to have to get a physical piece of every single paper, every single ribbon, etc. And I'm not able to include it in the names because it makes the names too long for them to work, so it will have to be a separate kind of chart, but that is something I have planned for a future update. I hinted on this earlier, but you'll be able to use this Creative Cloud library in any program throughout Creative Cloud. We've tested it in InDesign, Photoshop, and Illustrator extensively, and it works well in all of those. Of course, I know that Illustrator is one that most of us use fairly often, as well as InDesign, but it should work in all of the Creative Cloud platforms. And lastly, because I have done this as a export and import file as opposed to just sharing the library with people. Your library is yours alone. Any edits that you make to it will not affect anyone else's library. And I did that on purpose so that you can change things around. If there's a brand that is local to you, that's really specific, if you have a local printer that carries a few things and you want to add that in here, that's awesome. I have a YouTube video about how to create these libraries, customize. You can delete things that you're never going to use. You can move things around and put the things you use the most at the top. You can delete swatches that you don't like. You can change the names. You can change the CMYK values if there's something that you're not loving, etc. So you can make this your own, and I hope that you do, because I want this to be really functional for you. But I hope that the brands that are in here, the palettes that are in here, have given you the majority of all the pieces that you're going to use and all the vendors that you use regularly. And as we continue to update, I'm sure we will have some vendors that we add in, some swatches that we change around, like Artist Air changes their palette every single year, so we'll try and make sure to do an update at the beginning of each year to include that. If you have any suggestions for us moving forward on the palette, please feel free to recommend those. I do want to say, if you do a ton of work to this palette and then we do an update, you're going to have to do some of that work again. So what you might want to do is have your own palette that you've edited, upload the updated one, and then kind of copy and paste over swatches from one palette to the other to keep all the edits you made to your original palette. So I want this to be an amazing tool for you. If you haven't purchased it yet, the link is in the description of this video, and you're welcome to join the group of people who are using the Stationer's Swatchbook. There is a list on the link of all the different swatches that are included, but you can kind of see through here, there's tons of paper, handmade paper, wax seals, and ribbons, and I'm not closed off to including other types of vendors as well. These are just the most common ones that a lot of us use in the stationery industry, especially here in the United States. So let me know what you think. If you have any questions about the palette, feel free to leave them in the comments. And if you do have suggestions for any colors that should be changed or any vendors that should be added, please let me know via email. My email is info@bylaney.com, and I would be happy to consider those for future updates. So thank you for joining the Stationer's Swatchbook, and I hope you enjoy it, and I hope it saves you so much time, because that is absolutely my goal, and I've already found it to be so helpful in my design process. Thanks, everyone.